As a person with great interest in Roman history and just history in general, Pliny the Younger has always been someone that I've thought of as a really peculiar case and a really interesting person. And recently, as of or last semester, I was able to have the chance to write a long form paper about it. And I thought it was really successful. It was went really in detail into some of his administrative practices, a lot of the people that he met, and it was based off of a really interesting paper by this French guy, Fabien Germerut. I will never be able to pronounce that name. And I based a lot of my work off of that. He made a series of sort of spider webs that connected Pliny with many members of the Roman world, and I thought that was really interesting. But I thought that I could do a more wholesale and overview look, whereas he kind of viewed it more as a case by case. He'd look into one of Pliny's letters, more of a longer one, with a certain member, say perhaps like a Trajan or a Suetonius, and he would use maybe perhaps the people mentioned or the implications of other people to create a spider web. So I wanted to look at how he interacted with these people that he sends the letters to, and the specificities of how he is related to his friends and confidants, because I believe that is imperative to fully grasp Pliny as a person. And so in the paper, I attempted to deliver a more stratified model of Pliny the Younger's connections to better understand his political system. I believe that Pliny's letters offer us the best view into his life and network and can be used to obtain a holistic view of his interactions. With hundreds of letters containing a wide variety of topics, it can be difficult to fully grasp the many facets of Pliny and his connections. To better understand his lengthy work, I grouped his letters into four general categories that I will go over briefly. Before getting started, though, I would like to touch on a few things. First and foremost, I have never uploaded a true YouTube video like this before. I mean, I dabbled in it as a kid, but this will be extremely rudimentary. I don't really know what I'm doing. I just thought it would be kind of cool to share some of my findings on the internet for the perhaps two or three people that find it to be cool as well. Second of all, planned on putting like Elden Ring content in the background, but the Xbox app is being extremely ridiculous for no reason right now. So sorry to all of the low attention span people who need Subway Surfers in the background. Couldn't get that going. Hopefully we'll have that up for the next time we can upload. And without further ado, I would like to get into this paper and what I think is something that's extremely interesting, and I think there's some really cool findings to and implications that go along with it. As said prior, let's break down Pliny's interactions into four general categories, or letters. The first one, Pliny sometimes writes letters that can be seen as scathing and perhaps critical. He takes his network of friendships seriously and believes that contact between them is imperative. To this end, he is not afraid of chastising his friends in writing for not updating him on their lives or committing some wrongdoings. Although this is the least weighty of the four categories, it provides an interesting outlook into Pliny's character. Second, Pliny, especially as he ages in prestige, finds himself as an advisor to a plethora of individuals within the Roman world. He acknowledges his intellect and his standing in Roman society, and it is obvious that others think similarly. On multiple occasions, he complains about how much time he has to dedicate to helping his friends with his administrative obligations. This work ranges from providing speeches to relaying information to help others, and everything in between. This is the concern of many of his letters and emphasizes the sheer number of connections he maintained. Third, Pliny addresses a select bunch of individuals in a truly equal manner. The most notable of them is historian Tacitus, but there are others. They typically constituted the political and social elite of the Roman Empire at the time, and tended to have a great deal of influence within the empire. Pliny's letters to them give us insight into his day-to-day proceedings and also some more important cases or procedures that he has participated in. The fourth and final category. Pliny can be said to have a strong will and respectably carries himself, but there is one man that he subverts himself to. This is the Emperor Trajan. Pliny writes to Trajan in a manner that is not seen in any of his other series of letters. Pliny's rhetoric and tone are considerably different than in other works, and it is obvious that he respects the emperor greatly. Trajan himself also cares for Pliny deeply, and is reflected in how he addresses Pliny, and through his considerable praise for Pliny's work. The relationship as a whole is exceptionally intriguing, and I'll expand upon it later in the video. With these guidelines set, In this video, I will address the inner workings of Pliny the Younger's relationships in a manner that will establish a stratified analysis of how these relationships operated and the overall conclusions that can be drawn from them. So as I said earlier, Pliny is not afraid to call out his friends and confidants for acting in ways that he could describe as unfavorable to him. He does a lot for the people in his life and he expects them to act accordingly. Maybe if they don't fulfill a promise or keep sufficient contact, he is of the mind that it is within his bounds to react with a reasonable amount of anger. Although these letters are few and far between, they tend to be some of the sort of pieces of work as well, but they provide insight not only into his character, but into the complexities of his relationship. Since it can be really difficult to gauge the true spirit of a two individual's relationship just through writing alone, how one addresses the other and the power dynamic that comes from that is one of the most important things in determining the specific factors in the relationship, especially in a historical sense. It can be assumed that most people would not address a person that they thought of as higher up in an exceptionally critical or demeaning manner. I wouldn't send an email to my boss calling him a bitch. I would get fired. That would, not be good. So this allows us to see which people Pliny thinks of as lower than him, or perhaps on level. We all trash our friends sometimes. So, there is that. One of my favorite examples of Pliny's inclination to call out his confidants' wrongdoings comes in his letter to Fabius Justus, a Roman senator. Pliny opens by stating that Justus has failed to send him letters for quite some time. He then refuses to accept Justus's excuse that he has nothing to write. As if that is the case, he should simply write or inform Pliny that he is doing all right, and nothing more. He ends by displaying his concern about remaining ignorant towards Justus's well-being, and that it is crucial that Justus writes back immediately. Although an incredibly brief correspondence, by Pliny's standards at least, it gives us a sense of how he interacted with his network. Information on Justus is limited, and much of our understanding of him comes from the work of Ronald Syme. But it can be gathered that Pliny and Justus were both influential actors in Roman politics, and even shared a friend in Tacitus. Justus's state leads me to purport that he and Pliny were of pretty much equal grounds, with Pliny only being slightly higher up in power than Justus. This issue with Justus is addressed and resolved in Book 7, Letter 2. Although we do not have the letter that Justus sent to Pliny, it would seem that Justus explained his current busy schedule, likely on campaign, and that he will write more adequately in the winter. It seems that I got a phone call and not answering all that. Anyways, another thing that can be gathered is that Justus asked Pliny for some of his writings, which seems to irk Pliny, for he questions the consistency of being too busy to write but having enough leisure time to indulge in readings. Regardless, he accepts Justus's claim and says that he will look among my trifles for some pieces. Pliny's dealing with Justus offers us a glimpse into his political world and how he manages this, even resorting to harsh criticism to keep his affairs in order. Pliny does not just ensure that his written correspondence are in check, though. He also takes great concern over his social matters as well. Pliny can be chiding Septus Clarus, the future prefect of the Praetorian Guard, and the one who influenced Pliny to publish his letters in the first place, for not showing up to a dinner after Clarus promised that he would. What a douchebag. Although it can be said that parts of Pliny's letter are mere jokes, he is deeply upset at Clarus for not showing up. Pliny even said that Clarus preferred to dine at some nobody's house instead of enjoying the excellent evening that he would have experienced had he followed through on his promise. Even though Pliny is harsh on Clarus in the letter described, this love of jokiness employed is up to interpretation. Pliny's genuine care for Clarus is evident in his letter to Apollinaris, which he describes Clarus as the most genuine, straightforward, frank, and reliable person that I know. Pliny is not afraid to dish out criticism when he deems merited, but he gives credit and praise when it is due, although I question him calling him reliable when he skipped a dinner party, but short memory, I guess, or perhaps this was before. Though this first theme of letters, Pliny shows a great deal of honesty and the ability to show that he can hold his correspondence accountable. Although these are just two examples of this, he puts these skills on display time and time again. Letters like these give us modern historians a better understanding of the relationship between Pliny and his friends and allow us to better map out where they stand in his life. Alright, Section 3, A Great Advisor. Pliny dealt with a great deal of requests from his many friends. The sheer volume of tasks that he takes on for them is documented even in the pages of his writings. At one point, he remarks to Cornelius Ursus, "So exacting are the many concerns of my friends, which allow me neither to retire from Rome nor to get down to study." Much of Pliny's time is consumed by dealing with his friends and is evident in the ginormous number of letters that address their issues. Thus, I have selected a couple of representative samples to give a good idea of what Pliny does for his correspondence and how it deals with his overall network. When Salius Proculus, presumably the same satirist mentioned by Juvenal, requests for Pliny to review some of his works to see if they are worthy of being published, Pliny accepts without complaint. Pliny even heaps praise on Salius and describes his boundless admiration for him. Pliny's language in the letter leads me to believe that he, to an extent, enjoys requests like this. Whether it's because he likes to help out his friends, or if it is because he knows that doing favors for people can be useful later down the line if their services are required, is up for debate, but I believe that it's a mix of both. But he enjoys interacting with the minds of his day and making friends out of them. He's a true intellectual. But he also understands the political game well enough to know that the greater number of allies in Rome, the better, obviously. Something of particular interest is the fact that Pliny seems to be reviewing a piece of poetry for Salius. Although Pliny, like many of the men in his time, dabbled in verse, it's a Roman thing, he was not necessarily the greatest poet, and it was more of a hobby to him. Nevertheless, he was still trusted to adequately criticize poetic works and determine if they were good enough to be published. This is further evidence of his stature within the Roman world at the time and his general multidisciplinary nature. His friends and others would come to him for a wide variety of issues, knowing that he would most likely provide them with a solution. Besides his many friends' requests for matters concerning the literary oratory, Pliny's status in the Roman body politic is attractive to many of individuals seeking help in administration, law, and otherwise. One such man is Titanus Sabinus, a military commander native of Firmum, a Roman town on the east coast of the Italian peninsula, now known as simply Fermo. Sabinus is the subject of two other letters by Pliny, and the general tone is an indication that they are not as close as many other of Pliny's correspondence. Sabinus requests for Pliny to undertake proceeding, Firmum. Although Pliny indicates a great number of things on his hand, he said that he will try and fulfill this request. The implications of his work with the citizens of the community are ultimately unimportant for the sake of this paper, but the fact that Sabinus made such a request in the first place speaks to the high standing of Pliny and the notoriety of his work. Implicated earlier, the tone in which Pliny addresses Sabinus indicates that they are perhaps not the closest of friends, and that is significant for this discussion. Pliny is already swamped with work, and might seem logical if he outright denied Sabinus' request, because Sabinus is not even one of his closer confidants. But Pliny does not do such. Rather, he says that he will attempt the job. This again comes back to what influenced Pliny to make this decision. Unlike other cases where it can be argued that he might just be taking such cash out of the care of his heart or his friends, this particular interest seems to be influenced almost solely by his gains from undertaking such work. This becomes clear towards the end of his letter when Pliny indicates that he will call the citizens of Firmum his rather than calling them Sabinus's. Pliny is gaining influence in this part of the empire, and I would argue that he's implying that he will supersede Sabinus' influence in the city. This is an incredible example of how Pliny does not just lend his hand out of the kindness of his heart, but also to accomplish something. He was always playing the political and social game, and it seems he often won. Pliny's boundless pursuit of helping the many members of his network is impressive and depicts him as a hardworking man. Although a significant number of these efforts can be delineated as being done out of selflessness, many others were done to gain something that Pliny desired. It must be said that not all letters in this category concern advice or help, as a select number concern Pliny writing individuals in a manner that certainly positions them as their superior, without the added advice aspect. It is my belief that Pliny the Younger is one of the greatest minds of his time, and few people could be described as a true equal. Even his more casual letters, Pliny often seems to have what can be described as an intellectual high ground. This is not to say that Pliny is condescending or patronizing towards his friends, rather it is perhaps the opposite. Pliny often heaps praise upon his friends, and according to him, some think that he does it too much. He seems to exert a great deal of effort in complimenting his correspondence, but when push comes to shove, he often comes off as the greater of minds. Now, it must be addressed that these conclusions are reached based on the letters of one man, not many, and it is difficult to truly tell where Pliny in a correspondence stands without their letters back to him. Nevertheless, I believe there to be sufficient evidence to accurately claim his high standing. Regardless, Pliny addresses many of the best and brightest of the Roman world upon more equal grounds, and this section is dedicated to the analysis of such. There is one contemporary of Pliny that is almost a direct match. In less academic terms, I believe that they were besties, and I had canon that. This is the historian Tacitus, who is the recipient of several of Pliny's letters. Their friendship and dynamic deserves its own paper entirely, and video, but I'm gonna try and describe it pretty concisely. In around 106 or 107 CE, Pliny writes to Tacitus and informs him that he has marked up Tacitus' book and is sending his own over for review. This mutual exchange seems to have brought up some sentiments in Pliny's mind, as he said that he hopes in the future reports will circulate everywhere of the harmony, frankness, and loyalty we have shown each other in our lives. He further describes Tacitus as his natural equal who he imitates best. Aw, love them. He loves the fact that in any conversation in which one of them is brought up, the other is brought up as well. Pliny believes that the two of them are bound together on so many facets of human being that they will have practically identical legacies. It would be an understatement to say that Pliny took an inclination towards Tacitus and vice versa. Their friendship is adored by Pliny and by Tacitus as well, as he seems to like Pliny more with age. Side note, Ronald Syme, who I mentioned earlier, really big historian and Pliny scholar and just Roman scholar in general, he believed that Tacitus didn't like Pliny. I disagree, and I think that there's plenty of evidence, especially some late 1990s research that correlates with that Tacitus, it was mutual. Anyways, Pliny and Tacitus are not just close because of chance, but also because of the positions they held in the circles they presided in. Tacitus was only 6 years Pliny's senior. They also both held consulships at one point, with Tacitus holding a position in 97 CE and Pliny in 100. They're further renowned in the literary world, with Tacitus being one of the most esteemed historians to come from the Roman Empire, and Pliny being one of the greatest orators and writers of his time, placed them in similar circles. It is no surprise that they ended up in close correspondence with one another. As I said earlier, it is certainly not beyond Pliny to heap lavish praise, but how he described Tacitus is different, as it involves a comparison to himself that he would normally not indulge in when describing his other friends. They are impeccable equals, and their interactions provide us with a further layer of Pliny's world. Pliny was also close to another famous writer, Suetonius. Suetonius' work on successive Roman rulers from Julius Caesar to Domitian is incredibly important for modern historians, and he is one of the most reputable Romans from Pliny's time. Pliny and Suetonius share a strong bond, and it is evident that they are close. In one of their letters, Pliny is responding to Suetonius' comment about a nightmare that he had about one of his cases. Pliny understands his plight and relates it to situations that he has previously experienced. Pliny thinks that this bad dream will merit good things in that case. Pliny describes how he dreamt that his mother-in-law begged him not to take on a certain case, but he did so anyway and won it. A true winner and a goat lawyer. Perhaps his age is Better Call Saul. Pliny regards the two situations different, but he says that Suetonius should make his decision either by the common superstition or by Pliny's example. Obviously, you should take by Pliny's example. I mean, superstition is goofy anyways. This letter in particular sticks out due to the unusual subject matter. Pliny does not seem to indulge in this sort of correspondence with really anybody else, and Pliny and Suetonius have a tight bond that allows them to share more personal and perhaps odd facets of their individual lives. Suetonius also fits in with other close friends of Pliny due to his importance, both at the time and now. Pliny and Suetonius were both great intellectuals and political figures at the time, so it is no surprise that they became close. Pliny had a clique that he enjoyed the most, and it would seem that his most important friends were the best and brightest of the times. Again, it's difficult to really understand who was on equal terms with Pliny through writing alone, but through careful observation and literary analysis, we can get a good sense of his relationships. The people with whom Pliny shared the closest bonds with were often really influential in their own right, and brought a side of Pliny that is often not reflected in his other letters that are, perhaps more neutral. There is one man to whom Pliny addresses his letters in a manner in which he does to no other. Rather than writing atop intellectual superiority, he prefers to bend the knee to authority and appears submissive. Perhaps breedable? That's out of pocket. Anyways, to Pliny, Emperor Trajan is among the greatest of men, and he holds the utmost respect for him. The emperor has an entire chapter of Pliny's letter exclusively to him, and is the only correspondent who has his letters featured in Pliny's work. So there's back and forth, which is really amazing, and it allows us to get a wondrous sense of their dynamic. Pliny addresses Trajan in the most complimentary of manners, which is understandable, and he consistently heaps praise upon him. Pliny is certainly not foreign to excessive compliments, especially regarding his friends, but how he writes to Trajan is not the same. Pliny and Trajan's dynamic might be expected of most people outside the royal family who know the emperor, but Pliny's preeminence and general sense of high standing might be thought of as grounds for a more equal relationship. This is not necessarily the case, at least in the beginning, as Pliny takes a submissive role in his beseeching Trajan in a great deal of letters to him. This is not to say that Trajan looks down on Pliny with apathy or general dislike. Rather, Trajan is fond of Pliny. Trajan appointed Pliny governor of Pontus, Bithynia, and often addressed Pliny as his fondest or dearest. At the behest of Lucius Julius Ursus Servanius, fucking Romans and their long ass names, an incredibly influential Roman politician and friend of Pliny, Trajan granted Pliny the immunion of the Jus Trium Liborum, which was typically reserved for Roman citizens with 3 children, as that's kind of what it means. Trajan's letters to Pliny reveal that he put great trust in him and was ardent to put the younger Pliny in a position of greater self-reliance. I believe that this reinforcement and bolstering of confidence undertaken by Trajan directly led to a more equal relationship as the years went by. This is to say that Pliny started in a subservient role to the emperor, but by the end of his life, Pliny had acquired the status necessary to take on a more respectable position towards Trajan. I'm not postulating that he was on equal terms with Trajan at any point. I mean, Trajan was the Caesar. I believe that Pliny's letters always indicate a sense of docility, but I purport that Pliny trended towards a more equal relationship as time passed. The first written correspondence between the two is from 98 CE, presumably shortly after the death of Nerva and the ascension of Trajan to the position of imperator. This is made clear by Pliny wishing Trajan the best for his reign and describing how Nerva's death seemed to be God pushing Trajan to his deserved position. Trajan's succession on its own is a tumultuous and complicated matter that I'm not going to go into detail about because I'm not doing all that, but Pliny was very aware of this fact and could have partly driven him to write the letter, kind of reassuring him that it was kind of crazy before, but you're good now. I mean, besides it being customary. During Trajan's ascension to the throne in late January 98 CE, Pliny was beginning his role as the prefect of the treasury of Saturn. In letter 3 of book 10, Pliny indicates that it was both Trajan and Nerva who got into his position, but this is kind of a subject of debate because this might not really be true. It kind of might be praising him. But Elmer Truesdell Morel offers the most compelling explanation for Pliny's claim that Pliny was nominated for the position in early January 98 CE before Nerva's death, but ascended to the position after Trajan became emperor on January 27th of that year, thus explaining why he credits them both. I don't know, I feel like him ascending to it, Trajan kind of didn't really do anything. Maybe he oversaw some ceremony, but it might be glazing. There are a total of 14 letters between Pliny and Trajan in the years 98 to 102 CE, with Pliny writing 11 and Trajan only writing 3. The laconic nature of Trajan's replies to Pliny has led some to believe that Trajan's letters are not his own and are rather done via a ghostwriter. Bro think he's Drake. Or Taylor Swift. I take the position of the renowned classicist Oswald Dulk, and that the writings are in all likelihood from Trajan's hand. Immediately following Pliny's letters to Trajan in 102, there is no documented correspondence between the two of them until 109 or 1010. Sorry, fucking 1010, 110, what the hell? Although there is no clear reason for why this is, I will briefly mention a handful of potential explanations. The letters that modern historians have of Pliny's are not the original publications, but rather copies, obviously. This section of Pliny's letters may have been lost or accidentally left out of a copy. Also, Book 10 of Pliny's letters was not discovered until the 16th century by Giovanni Giocondo, which was descended from the original manuscript of the 10-book version of letters, which is dated around 490 CE. Elmer Merrill, again my goat, even claims that Book 10 is independent of all other letters and likely was not even published in Pliny's lifetime. I mean, I agree with it. It's so much different than the other ones, it's ridiculous. You gotta read it. How Pliny's letters got to modern historians is complicated and is within the realm of possibility that part was left out or lost in the millennia since their writing. Since it was not Pliny who organized Book 10, whoever did so may have not found any of these letters worthwhile to put into publishing. Pliny makes it clear in the first letter of Book 1 that he's intentionally assembling his letters for publication, not necessarily by chronological order, but by careful assemblage of particular topics, and whoever took on this assembly job after Pliny's death may have thought similar. This explanation relies on pure speculation, but someone may have found it in their best interest to include Pliny's letters to Trajan from this time for reasons unknown to us. It might have been boring. Trajan and Pliny could have also had little to no written correspondence during this period, but I find this highly unlikely and not based on any real trends or evidence. Anyways, around 109 to 110 is where the next section of letters picks up. For a 2 to 3 year period, Pliny and Trajan sent 107 letters in total. Unlike the first 14 letters, in which Pliny sent a massive percentage, 78.5, in comparison to Trajan's 21.5%, the ratio of who sent letters much more even, 56.1 to 43.9 respectively. Although this argument relies on the assumption that these two groups of letters encompass the majority of the letters between the two men at the time, I believe this depicts a positive shift in the relations between the two men in the first decade or so of Trajan's reign. The year 110 is an important demarcation as well. In 110, Pliny became the imperial governor of the Pontus Bithynia province. At the time, the territory was the senatorial province, meaning that it was the Senate that selected the governors, but Trajan undoubtedly had a significant influence on the selection of governors in these provinces. Trajan likely even gave a mandata, which gave Pliny the position. Trajan's influence on the province is evidenced in Pliny's letters, as a great deal of them surround the younger Pliny requesting advice from Trajan in decision-making in the province, most famously in the case of the Black Sea Christians. Although Pliny certainly relies on Trajan to make decisions in the province, the emperor still has a great deal of trust in the governor. Trajan's newfound fondness for Pliny is evidenced in the way in which he addresses him. Starting in letter 16, Trajan addresses Pliny as his most dear Secundus, and he continues to use this along with Pliny calling Pliny the more endearing fondest Secundus. I would love for Trajan to call me that. That's cool. I need to stop yapping. Pliny continues to address Trajan as my lord, but he is not so subservient to Trajan as in the first batch of letters. Pliny is certainly under Trajan and must listen to the emperor's command on the issues that he brings up to him. Pliny is more equal to the emperor than in years past. Pliny does not feel the need to bombard Trajan with endless praise and pomp, and his tone is more formal and straightforward. Further, Pliny can fit his own opinion on matters when writing his letters to Trajan, indicating his confidence and ability to influence the emperor. In late 111, Pliny writes to the emperor about a concern that he has regarding the city of Amastris in Pontus. He describes how there is a river of sewage that flanks a pleasant-looking section of the city, and he's like, "Yo, Trajan, I need to cover this stuff up. This is disgusting." Trajan's like, "Yeah, dude, do it. You can take some money for it." Unlike in previous letters in which Pliny would seek advice, Pliny is putting forward something that he would like to see done and simply conferring with his higher up. Like me when I'm like, "Yo, boss, can I take a 3-hour lunch?" Because I'm not doing that, but I still want it to count towards my hourly wage. And then he says no. Damn. I believe Trajan welcomes Pliny's movements towards a more independent administration of his province, as he gains more confidence in the younger Pliny. Trajan's continued confidence entices Pliny to take more of an individual approach, as well as which only tightens their bond. The last pair of letters between the two men is from 112, and concerns Pliny letting Trajan know that he granted his wife a travel pass due to her losing his grandfather or something. Pliny never got the chance to fully see out the administration in his province, as he died abruptly in either 112 or 113. Though there could have been around 4 more years of correspondence between the two men, as Trajan died in 117, there's enough evidence to suggest an upward trend in Trajan's trust and liking for Pliny. They're obviously never equals, due to Pliny's direct reliance on Trajan for decision making, but Pliny's relationship to Trajan shifted from that of a subject to that of more of a trusted advisor. Alright, so I've been talking a lot about Pliny in terms of relationships with others, but I kind of want to spend some time talking about him as an individual. I believe that he's one of the greatest political actors of his time, and his skill and influence are really evident. His constant praise and seemingly kind nature in his letters give the impression that he was just a nice and hardworking person, perhaps a pushover. Some historians, Ronald Syme, think that. But Pliny was, at the end of the day, successful in politics for a reason. Pliny was crafty and cunning, perhaps more so than is typically associated with him. Ronald Syme. He's dead, so he's not going to hear that. In letter 13 of book 9, Pliny describes to a friend events that occurred in the Senate. Pliny had made a series of speeches in vindication of a friend of his who had recently been executed by the previous emperor Domitian. Domitian was already dead, so Pliny was not making this speech to target the previous emperor, but rather the man who has prosecuted his friend, Publius Certus. His prosecution against Certus is ultimately successful, and Certus was not awarded the consulship for that year and was left with his political ambitions in ruin. Absolutely insane. What a beast in court. Pliny had brilliantly convinced the Senate of Certus' wrongdoing and destroyed his career in the process. Towards the end of his letter, Pliny remarks that Certus dies a few days after his speech, and although I typically don't want to do long block quotes, this is one of my favorite quotes from the entire book. By coincidence, which looked rather more than a coincidence, Certus was taken ill and died a very few days after I published my book. I've heard people say that he was haunted by a phantom that was forever presenting itself to his mind and gaze, that he thought he saw me threatening him with a sword. I should not like to say that this was the case, but it adds to the moral that it should be considered as true. What was wild? The wording of this last bit is really peculiar, and it has made me question whether or not Pliny had some role in Certus' death, especially as different translations have different wordings of that last section, and I don't understand Latin that well, so I have no idea. Certus was the prefect of Saturn at the time of his death in 98 CE, and naturally this position had to be filled. I talked about earlier how he got this position of the prefect of Saturn in 98 CE, but I failed to mention who his predecessor was. There's no proof indicating Pliny of any foul play, but further research on the subject may be able to absolve or implicate Pliny in Certus' death. I do not consider him to be the perpetrator of Certus' untimely death due to the lack of evidence, but the matter is peculiar enough that it should be looked into. I mean, I'm not a true crime podcaster, so I don't really care, but it's kind of cool. I'm not speculating. I'm not insinuating anything, though. I just thought it was extremely interesting. But the more important thing is that stuff like this really shows his raw political skill in court and in the Senate and whatever. Wherever he is, he's that guy. Pliny's personality and ways of life are summed up in a letter to Pompus Bassus, an important political figure of the time. Pliny talks about how a person needs to devote much of their life until old age to their native lands and only enjoy a life of leisure once that time has passed. This suits Pliny's hardworking and busy persona that I have often described him and reinforces the sheer dedication that he has to certain causes. Pliny wonders when the day will come when he will be able to rest and enjoy a life of leisure. It seems he is worried that he will not know when to stop or how to identify the day in which he can cease his dedication to his glorious Rome. At heart, Pliny is a really anxious man who is overstressed by his work and friends. Although he thinks that in doing this he is serving a greater good for his homeland, he also has a dream of a more relaxed life in the back of his mind. Unfortunately, he doesn't get this. It's almost fitting, though, but really tragic that a man who dedicated his life to the service of his native land died while holding an important position within that land. Pliny, as well as with all humans, is a complicated figure, and it's difficult to get a true grasp on his character with limited resources, but he was certainly a hardworking dude with a knack for a great deal of intellectual endeavors and a kind man who sought to help those around him and his empire as a whole. Yeah, I thought describing this paper was going to be long. It's 32 minutes already, but we're close to the end game. We're going to talk about some actual data because, well, I mean, not really that much data. Not a math major, not doing all that, or stats major. But I grouped all of the letters into each of the categories that I set up, 1 through 4. And so, interestingly enough, I found that only 8 letters went into the category of scathing critic. I thought there would have been a few more, but whatever. I found that 127 letters went into the category number 2 of advisor. 105 went into 3 as equal, and 71 went into category 4 of Trajan, and 6 were kind of others that I was like, oh. Anyways, there are some discrepancies that I have to address. The number of letters that fall into category 2 and 1 are slightly lower than I would have thought, and the number of letters that are in 3 are quite higher than I would have expected. It would seem that although much of Pliny's letters position him as giving out advice, passing information, or generally maintaining a higher stance than that of the recipient, Pliny is on equal terms with a great deal of correspondence that supports the robustness of Pliny's network by showcasing the high numbers of trusted correspondence and equals that he had. The only point of interest besides what I've already stated is the presence of another. Yeah, some of them were just not in there. A lot of them were like economic stuff. Like he was talking about a house, and I was like, Pliny, dude, I don't care. Anyways, a possible issue with these groupings is there's the potential for different categorizations. Different people are going to categorize these in different places after reading my descriptions of each category. But I think that no matter what, there's similar trends. The numbers just might be plus or minus a few. But this data provides new insight into Pliny's network and allows us to better stratify the relationships that he maintained. Potential to sort his letters into even greater categories is enticing, as it will lead to a greater scrutinization of his work, which will bear greater fruits. I am not doing all that. I am tired. We have finally made to the conclusion. This is a lot of yapping, and I apologize for the long amounts of yapping, but in this video, I've attempted to build upon past studies of Pliny the Younger's political network to get a better understanding of the man, his life, and his relationships, broke his letters up into 4 categories, analyzed a few, and went through it all. I think I was able to get a really incredibly vivid look into him as a person and the facets of his personality. He was a really talented politician, orator, writer, and friend. He maneuvered the political landscape in a really sophisticated and calculated manner. I think further works should look into his maneuverings in great detail to discover more about his actions in the political world. Sorry, there's noise outside. Additionally, the methods by which Pliny acquired the prefecture of Saturn are of particular interest, and someone should find out if he was, in some way, shape, or form, did something to lead to someone's death, perhaps. Altogether, his network was robust and filled with many of Rome's greatest minds of the time. He utilized his network to bolster his stance within the Roman world and gain power. Analysis of his letters provides us with greater insight into his world and how he maintained it. Pliny certainly had plenty of individuals who treated him as an advisor or authority figure, but his letters also depict many equals whom he relied on, as they relied on him for support, advice, and deep friendship. How Pliny's network operated is fascinating, and it is my hope that this paper and this video furthers the general understanding of that as a whole. Oh my goodness, I don't know how I wasn't coughing for much more of that video. Surprised that I wasn't. Thank you for the perhaps few people that will watch this video. I had a great time writing this paper. It was been my favorite paper I've ever written. I had so much fun. It's really long. I'll link some of the studies, and I did a lot of literary review. So I will link some of those papers, especially my least favorite man, Ronald Syme, in the description of this video. Thank you all for watching. My voice is fucked. I'm sure your eardrums are fucked from the amount of yapping that I've done. I've tried to cut out a lot of parts. I wrote a script. I had an AI write a script off of the paper to turn it into a speech. This cough is gonna kill me. So yeah, thank you all for watching. This is really rudimentary and definitely not a brilliant work. I hope the audio quality is good. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in like 4 months when I decide to make another video, when I have time to make another video because college is busy. But in 3 months' time, I will see you then. Peace.